economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
In today's top stories, the head of state Abdelmajid Tebboune has launched in the province of Tindouf projects of strategic dimension for the benefit of this border province. As Israeli occupation forces resumed their attacks from the air, land and sea on the Gaza Strip this morning, marking the end of a seventh-day pause, at least 65 Palestinians have been killed, mainly children and women. And the 47th Conference of the European Coordination of Solidarity and Support for the Sahrawi People, UCOCO, is starting today in Toledo, Spain. Hello and welcome to Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Samani. The President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, chaired during the work and inspection visit which he carried out Thursday in the province of Tindouf the launch of projects and strategic dimension for the benefit of this border province. On this occasion, the President laid the foundation stone for the Garaj Bilet primary iron ore processing plant as part of the development and exploitation of the mine, one of the world's largest in terms of reserves, with almost 3.5 billion tons of iron and a production capacity of 2 to 3 million tons a year in the first phase. More on the visit paid by the President of the Republic to the province of Tindouf with Saïd Bougazi.
President Tebboune stressed the importance of creating a mining town around the iron ore deposit and insisted on the immediate launch of work on the Bishar Steel Complex. He also stressed the importance of providing all services such as electricity and water for the local population as part of a true mining town. According to the industrial mining group Sonarem, the integrated Garaj Bilet deposit, which should help to create 25,000 direct jobs and 125,000 indirect jobs, will see the construction of housing and social structures, including those relating to the mining town of Garaj Bilet. The President of the Republic also described the Garaj Bilet project as good news for the country's southwestern region, hailing it as a major development of the Algerian steel industry.
هذا تقدم يوم تاريخي بالنسبة للجزائر. دخلنا في المشروع الحقيقي. هذه الانطلاقة إن شاء الله الوتيرة تمشي بأكثر سرعة. نظن بشرى بالنسبة لسكان المنطقة مناصب شغل. وبالنسبة للجزائر أعتقد أن المناجم تاعنا تعبت، المنجم تاع الحالي تاع الونزة صبحت التنور تاعو طريفة. كل حال حنا صناعة الحديد والصلب والمستخرجات تاعها تفتح آفاق كبيرة بالنسبة للجزائر.
In this context, he explained that Algerian products such as concrete reinforcing bars are in demand and sought after on international markets, Europe and Asia, thanks to the Oran and Billara plants. During his visit, President Tebboune also laid the foundation stone for the Bishar Tindouf Garaj Bilet railway project, which stretches over 950 kilometers. In this respect, he stressed the need to respect the deadlines of this strategic mega project set at 30 months, underlining that the future of Algeria is intimately linked to the Garaj Bilet mine, which he continued would save $3 billion in iron imports. On the sidelines of his visit, the President of the Republic met with notables and representatives of the civil society in Tindouf. This meeting took place in the presence of the Chief of Staff of the National People's Army ANP Army General Saïd Chengriha and members of the ministerial delegation accompanying the President of the Republic during his visit. During this meeting, President Tebboune listened to the concerns of the notables and representatives of the civil society in Tindouf, as well as their proposals for the state's efforts to stimulate the development dynamic in this province. On this occasion, President Tebboune stated that the province of Tindouf will become a real industrial hub, adding that the Garage Billet mine and the Bishar Tindouf Garage Billet railway are vital projects capable of eradicating unemployment by providing jobs for the region's young people. In the same context, he announced that the Prime Minister would be visiting Tindouf before the end of December in order to register an additional program for this province. The President of the Republic was given a warm welcome by the people and notables of the province of Tindouf. A huge crowd of citizens gathered in the early hours of the morning along the main thoroughfares leading to the province's main city, waving the national flag and banners welcoming the President of the Republic, praising the special interest he has shown in the province, which has benefited from strategic development projects to strengthen its position as a central province.
Now, as Israeli occupation forces resumed their attacks from the air, land and sea on the Gaza Strip this morning, marking the end of a seventh-day pause, at least 65 Palestinians have been killed since the resumption of atrocities in the early morning, with the majority being children and women, according to medical reports. Additionally, Israeli airstrikes struck 3 residential buildings in the Bureid refugee camp in the central Gaza Strip. This resulted in the murder and injury of multiple civilians. Simultaneously, the Israeli occupation forces carried out multiple aerial raids on the neighborhoods of Shujaiya and Al-Zaytun in the Gaza Strip. The death toll is expected to rise as rescue and medical teams continue their efforts to search for survivors and provide assistance to the wounded. At least 15,000 Palestinians, the majority of them innocent civilians, including over 6,500 children and over 3,000 women, have been killed since the beginning of the Israeli genocide campaign in Gaza on the 7th of October. Spokesman for the President Mahmoud Abbas, Nabil Abu Rudaina, has held the United States administration responsible for Israel's resumption of its aggression on Gaza, saying the U.S. administration has failed to compel Israel to stop its aggression. In a press statement, Abu Rudaina said the resumption of aggression against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, coupled with the escalation crimes of the Israeli occupation forces and terrorist settlers in the West Bank, is a continuation of the crimes of ethnic cleansing and genocide. The presidential spokesman emphasized that all these crimes will not bring security or peace to anyone in the region and must stop immediately. Meanwhile, the Jordanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has strongly condemned the Israeli occupation's resumption in its aggression on the Gaza Strip after a 7-day pause this morning. Here in Algiers, the Algiers Declaration, which is the outcome of the International Conference Justice for the Palestinian People held Wednesday and Thursday in Algiers, has called for a complaint to be lodged with the Office of the Prosecutor General of the International Court of Justice (ICC) in criminal proceedings against the leaders and authorities of the Zionist occupation, perpetrators of crimes against the Palestinian people, while thanking the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, for hosting this meeting. The details in this report by Said Bougazi.
The declaration recommends to get in touch with international organizations and international bodies mentioned in the conference's recommendations with a view to prosecuting the occupying Zionist entity. The commission, which will be formed, includes the President of the National Union of Algerian Lawyers, the President of the National Union of Algerian Magistrates, the President of the Jordanian Bar, the President of the current session of the Permanent Bureau of the Union of Arab Lawyers, General Coordinator of the Union's Legal Support, as well as the President of the Palestinian Bar Association. The commission may, at its appreciation, add a new member. The attached 51 recommendations resulting from the proceedings of the workshops are considered part of this declaration as well as its roadmap. The recommendations of the Algiers Declaration of Justice for the Palestinian People also include the thanks to the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, for hosting this international conference in Algeria. It should be noted that at the invitation of the National Union of Magistrates and the Algerian National Bar, Algeria's international conference entitled Justice for the Palestinian People was held on Wednesday and Thursday with the participation of a group of lawyers and legal experts from several countries to discuss the grave humanitarian situation in the occupied Palestinian territories, particularly in the Gaza Strip, and the serious crimes and violations committed by the Zionist occupying forces. The conference participants strongly condemned the brutal aggression by the occupying forces against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, notably the indiscriminate bombardment by air, land and sea targeting vital civilian buildings, the destruction of basic infrastructure, universities, hospitals, mosques, churches and civilian homes, as well as the invasion of northern Gaza and the forced displacement of its population, resulting in thousands of martyrs and injuries, many of them children, women and the elderly. They also denounced the blockade imposed on the inhabitants of Gaza, which prevents the delivery of humanitarian aid, foodstuffs, medicines, fuel and water. They said that these crimes were collective punishment and flagrant violations of the provisions of international humanitarian law and constitute war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. 4 workshops were held at the Algiers International Conference, the first of which was devoted to documenting crimes, the second to persecution before international courts that have adopted universal jurisdiction, among other international tribunals, the third deals with referrals to the International Criminal Court, and a workshop on complaints to be lodged with international organizations and bodies which focused on the organizational and procedural aspects. In a statement to APS workshop coordinator Fawzi Usadiq stressed that the drafters of the Algiers Declaration of Justice for the Palestinian People made sure that the recommendations are pragmatic and effective in the short and long term.
As you followed in our top stories, the 47th Conference of the European Coordination of Solidarity and Support for the Sahrawi People, UCOCO, is starting today in Toledo, Spain. According to the Polisario Front's representative in Switzerland and at the UN and international organizations in Geneva, Ubi Bushraya Bashir, the conference is an opportunity for participants to call on Spain to comply with international legality and return to its historic position on Western Sahara. Yesterday evening, an interparliamentary conference of solidarity with the Sahrawi people was held at the Spanish Parliament in Madrid, where participants called for pressure to be put on the Spanish head of government, Pedro Sanchez, to review his position on Western Sahara, Africa's last colony. The conference was also attended by the president of the UCOCO, Pierre Gallon, and a Sahrawi delegation comprising, among others, the Polisario Front representative in Spain, Abdallah Arabi, and the Sahrawi ambassador to Algiers, Abdelkader Taleb Omar. On this occasion, the president of UCOCO, Pierre Gallon, had this to say to our special envoy, Wahib Amiri.
We are now in Spain. Spain is a colonial country because they still support Morocco in a bad position. So what we ask to Spain, the new government, the new parliament, and to Europe is to make a step out of colonialism, to understand that Sahrawi people, they have their rights. All the international courts in Africa, in Europe, they say clearly that Occidental Sahara is an independent country, is not a part of Morocco. And they recognize the fact that the liberation movement, the Polisario, is well the representative of the Sahrawi people. Now, we must, with our colleagues here in Spain, at the European Parliament, there will be new election in June next year. It's the momento for a little bit change the vision that Europe and Spain have about the rest of the world. Colonialism is finished, and now we must make the step in the good direction. The good direction is the rehabilitation of the UN, rehabilitation of the international law, and to have the capacity to implement that in solidarity with all the people around the world.
Speaking to our special envoy Wahib Amiri, the political secretary of the South African ambassador in Algiers, Legodi Koporo Bernard, reiterated his country's support with the Sahrawi people.
South Africa continue to support the solidarity with the people of Western Sahara. South Africa continue to call this the holding of a referendum for the self-determination and independence and territorial integrity of the Sahrawi Republic. We call for the members of the international community to take a stand in terms of supporting the people of the Sahrawi Republic in realization of their rights. This will allow the creation of a conducive environment to allow for the engagement between the affected two parties to reach a conducive decision to liberate the people of Western Sahara.
The South African participant also stressed the importance of the international community to support the Sahrawi people at the humanitarian level, recalling Algeria's efforts in this regard.
South Africa also called for the intensive humanitarian support, because at the same time when there are differences among the international community, the people of Sahrawi Democratic Republic continue to suffer due to poverty that they are experiencing, and this call for the creation of a call for the implementation of sustainable resolution and of the implementation of a United Nations resolution and the African Union to support the people of Western Sahara. We also continue to appreciate the People's Democratic Republic of Algeria to providing accommodation for the Sahrawi people since they were moved from their own country.
The second day of the COP28 summit started today, a day after the historic launch of a fund to support countries hit by global warming. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned world leaders that this situation is alarming, adding that the world still has a chance to save the planet if actions are taken now.
Just days ago, I was on the melting ice of Antarctica. Not long before, I was among the melting glaciers of Nepal. These two spots are far in distance, but united in crisis. Polar ice and glaciers are vanishing before our eyes, causing havoc the world over, from landslides and floods to rising seas. But this is just one symptom of the sickness bringing our climate to its knees, a sickness only you, global leaders, can cure. Earth's vital signs are failing. Record emissions, ferocious fires, deadly droughts, and the hottest year ever. We can guarantee it even we are still in November. We are miles from the goals of the Paris Agreement and minutes to midnight for the 1.5 degree limit. But it is not too late. We can, you can, prevent planetary crash and burn.
Today, the 1st of December, Algeria, like the rest of the world, commemorate World AIDS Day, celebrated this year under the theme Let Communities Lead. Next, a program on the commemoration of this day.
Each year, the day is commemorated with a central theme. This year's theme for World AIDS Day is Let Communities Lead. It is time for the people around the globe to come together to support those living with HIV and to remember those who lost their lives to the disease. In New York, at a press conference, the Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director of the Program Branch of the Joint United Nations Programme on HIV or AIDS, Mrs. Anjali Ashokar, spoke about the commemoration of this day and spoke about the latest figures.
As you all know, every year on December 1st, the world comes together to commemorate World AIDS Day. It's a moment where we can all unite in solidarity to show support for the 39 million people that are living with HIV around the world, but also to remember and honor the 40.4 million lives that have been lost due to AIDS-related illnesses. This World AIDS Day actually comes at a momentous time. We know that there is a path to end AIDS. We are celebrating the fact that there's tremendous progress that we've seen in the global HIV response. AIDS deaths, for example, have decreased by nearly 70% since they peaked in the early 2000s. There are fewer new infections now than ever before. This is great progress that countries around the world have made. But it's important to note that the job is not yet done. Every single minute, a life is lost to AIDS. Every week, 4,000 adolescent girls and young women are newly infected by HIV. And still, 9.2 million people around the world that are living with HIV do not have access to life-saving treatment. So this is not a fate. We can change it, and we know how to do that.
Communities living with and affected by HIV, networks of people from key populations, and youth leaders have been and continue to be essential for progress in the HIV response. According to Mrs. Ashrakar, AIDS can be ended by 2030, but only if communities on the front lines get the full support they need from governments and donors. She said the world can end AIDS with communities leading the way.
The path to end AIDS has been trailblazed by communities. Countries succeed when communities on the front lines of the AIDS response leads the way. And so that's why this year, the theme for World AIDS Day is Let Communities Lead. It's the communities that know best. They know how to design, how to implement, how to monitor HIV programs and strategies to reach the people most in need. And it is the communities that will be the ones that sustain the HIV response into the future. Communities and countries have been showing the way and leading by example. There's no doubt that community leadership builds stronger and healthier societies. And again, that is why this World AIDS Day, it's not a moment to only just honor community leadership. It's also a moment for us to call to action, to governments to fully support communities, to organizations to fully support the life-saving work, and to remove the barriers that prohibit the way that communities can lead. Too often, communities are under-acknowledged, they're under-resourced, and in some places, they're under attack. In 2021, member states of the United Nations renewed their commitment to supporting communities in the HIV response, supporting a global AIDS strategy and targets for communities in the AIDS response. But we're not delivering for communities in the way that we need to.
Communities provide essential prevention, testing and treatment support services, build trust, generate innovative solutions, promote health, monitor the implementation of policies and programs, and hold providers accountable. That is why the theme for World AIDS Day this year is Let Communities Lead. The UN official said on World AIDS Day, we must reinforce the role of communities so they are allowed to lead.
So on this World AIDS Day, we want to reinforce the role of communities. We want to ensure that they are allowed to lead, as we've seen that they can. So we're urging all to first acknowledge community leadership, ensure that communities lead in the roles that we know they can and that they're central to the HIV response. Second, resource communities. We need to ensure that community leaderships are properly resourced. We've seen a decrease in funding around the globe to community organizations. That must increase. And third and finally, we need to protect communities, protect everyone's human rights. Right now, anti-human rights, anti-women's rights, anti-democracy, and shrinking civil space has threatened the work of community organizations and communities themselves. This has both threatened them as leaders in the response, in the HIV response, but it's also threatened the HIV response around the world. We have to remain hopeful and vigilant and continue to defend human rights of the communities that we serve. That communities are not in the way, they light the way. And today and this week on World AIDS Day, let's follow the theme and let communities lead.
HIV is a medical condition that carries a lot of stigma, usually because people lack information about it or they make moral judgments about how someone has contracted HIV. In this case of people living with HIV, stigma has negative effects on health outcomes, including non-optimal medication adherence, lower visit adherence, higher depression, and overall lower quality of life. Mrs. Ashrakar said that stigma is one of the main obstacles to eradicate HIV.
We are struggling with issues related to stigma and discrimination. We don't find that it's declining. It still continues to persist. It is a very strong barrier to access to services. We see stigma at all levels. We see stigma across the populations, across healthcare providers that are delivering services. So battling stigma is still a high priority for all of us. We will not achieve the targets that we've set out unless we address stigma and discrimination, unless we address policies, for example, that lead to lack of access to services. But yeah, stigma and discrimination is still a very serious issue, and oftentimes is why these populations that I mentioned, that where we still see gaps, are still farthest left behind.
A number of countries have already achieved the 95-95-95 targets. That means 95% of the people who are living with HIV knowing the HIV status. 95% of the people who know that they are living with HIV being life-saving, antiretroviral treatment, and 95% of the people who are on treatment being virally suppressed. The UNAIDS official highlighted this point.
You're right. We are making tremendous progress, like I noted, around the globe. Now, and I indicated, we're seeing AIDS deaths drop, we're seeing new infections lower than they've been before, but I noted those gaps. There are 1.3 million new HIV infections that occur every year. Okay, that's just what we saw last year. That is striking. That means we are leaving major populations behind, and we are not closing the gaps that need to be closed. So in order for us to achieve the targets that we've set and the world has agreed to, ending AIDS as a public health threat by 2030, we have to accelerate our HIV prevention efforts, particularly targeting populations that we're missing, key populations, for example, children, adolescent girls, and young women. We have to close the treatment gaps. We are seeing children far, far behind the adult population on access to life-saving treatment. In this time and space, it's unacceptable that children are as far behind as they are. So we've got to close the treatment gaps. And what we have to do is ensure that we're putting in place the ability for countries and communities to sustain the HIV response. So the final thing I'll just say is, it is achievable. It is possible. We are moving in the right direction. We've said when we released the data last summer that of all of the Sustainable Development Goals, the one that we're focused on, SDG 3.3, is actually moving in the right direction, and that is because of the progress we're making on the HIV response. But that progress is fragile, and we have to continue to close those gaps that I noted earlier with certain populations, and we have to be able to address the rising new infections and really accelerate our prevention efforts.
COVID-19 pandemic hampered the efforts of researchers on the field and efforts of organizations to reach the target. According to her, it was a challenge. She said in the African continent, the health system used in combating HIV helped the fight against COVID-19, but later unyielded in a stronger health system to continue the fight against HIV.
COVID and the pandemic and addressing the HIV pandemic at the same time, dual pandemics, was a real challenge for all countries and all communities. What we have seen is that in countries where there is a high HIV burden, for example, in the African continent, in sub-Saharan Africa, where there's been a tremendous amount of work that has happened to address HIV, and we're seeing incredible progress on the HIV/AIDS response. In addition to tackling HIV and AIDS, the response also contributed to stronger health systems, laboratory systems, surveillance systems, healthcare workers, community health workers, supply chain systems, clinical facilities, and the like. Those systems for health. Those strengthened health systems for the HIV response were instrumental in helping countries also combat COVID-19. So where COVID devastated many parts of the world, what we saw in Africa, yes, we saw a struggle. And it was challenging to maintain services for HIV. We also saw a bit of silver lining in that the health systems that were strengthened and in place for the HIV response helped countries respond to COVID and other health threats. So that's a bit of what we saw. We, as a globe, are still trying to ensure that we are bouncing back